It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Friday edition of the show. Hope you're having yourself a great day, and thank you so much for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a part of your workday. Big shout out to everybody also listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast. Of course, you can get that RealAg Radio podcast wherever you get your podcast. That's on Apple or Spotify, Stitcher, I think, whatever. You can just look it up, RealAg Radio. Okay, Friday, RealAg Issues Panel here today. We're going to cover a number of different topics. Busy week again in terms of agricultural news. We'll try to get to as much of it as actually humanly possible here on this Friday before the Canada Day long weekend. Looking forward to it, and hopefully you got yourself some big plans as well. If you have any feedback on today's show, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find us across all the different social media platforms as Real Agriculture, or you can call that Real Ag feedback line. The number is 855-776-6147. We're going to talk about a lot of issues today on the issues panel. We want your perspectives. Call the number, send me an email, and let us know what your opinion is, whether it's contrary to what you hear us talk about or it's agreeing. We just want your perspective. Join in the conversation, 855-776-6147. Let's take a break, and we'll get to the panel right after this.
This year might bankrupt us. If I lose the farm, I'm letting down generations of my family. Why am I the only one who can't handle it? Maybe the farm would be better off without me. Hello?
Hey, I was just thinking about you and thought I'd say hi. I know it's been a hard season, and I wanted to see how you're holding up.
We might feel alone, but we're all in this together. Visit domore.ag for mental health supports tailored for the agriculture community.
How's your seed quality? What should you treat with? What about herbicide carryover and environmental concerns? Spring is here, and you've got a lot of things to think about in regards to your pulse crop. The Pulse School on Real Agriculture has information and advice for all these questions and more to help you navigate this season. Brought to you by BASF. Pulse School episodes are available at pulseschool.com, realagriculture.com, or as a podcast on your favorite streaming service. Download the latest episode today.
Infuse some energy into your next corporate event, customer meeting, or conference with RealAg Radio, Canada's national agriculture radio show. Create a unique experience at your next event with host Shaun Haney, broadcasting RealAg Radio live on Sirius XM, featuring exciting guests, captivating interviews, and the latest news from the agriculture community. Contact advertising at realagriculture.com or call 587-787-1795 to book your on location with RealAg Radio today.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio, here for the RealAg Issues Panel before we bring the gang in. First, I want to mention Alpine. Making the most efficient use of your dollars spent on crop nutrition is a constant goal of all farmers. Alpine recognizes this hurdle, trying to bring about economic balance with ever-changing environmental conditions. Alpine developed the Maximizing Fertilizer Efficiency program to solve this yearly dilemma. You can find out more by going to 1-800-265-2268. Well, you shouldn't go there. You should just call the number. That's 1-800-265-2268. Big thanks to Alpine for being a longtime sponsor of RealAg Radio. Hey, let's get to the panel. We got a lot of issues to break down, and this would be a really, really fun discussion here today. Up first, it's Lyndsey Smith coming out of Ottawa, Ontario. Lyndsey, how are you?
I'm well. How are you? It is muggy and smoky.
Oh, this smoke thing. You guys never had forest fire smoke before? You're like, Easterners are sure complaining.
So funny you should mention it, but actually it is quite rare. So like not unheard of for sure. But honestly, I think I've said this before, I've been here almost I think it's about 9 years. This is the first time that it's really been this bad and really bad. And I think, of course, the center of the universe, Toronto, getting smacked with it too. So we're going to hear about it a lot more because of that.
Well, I'm sure Kelvin, and welcome to the show, Kelvin. I'm sure you heard about it on the Blue Jays broadcast on the radio this week. They were really complaining about the fact the big impact has been they've had to have the dome, the Rogers Center closed. The roof has been shut, which is you only get so many days for that roof to be open, and they've had to have it shut because of all that smoke. So there you go. Are you seeing any smoke, Kelvin?
We've had pretty clear skies here, a little bit of smoke, but not, and again, like you alluded to here in Western Canada, I think we're more used to it. I kind of feel like a Winnipeg Jets or Calgary Flames fan hearing all this talk, how they feel when the media only talks about the Toronto Maple Leafs and Montreal Canadiens. That's kind of how it feels with this smoke situation where like Eastern Canada, this smoke is part of summer, most cases in Western Canada. So, but yeah, the Blue Jays games have been impacted. Other games along the East Coast and into central parts of the U.S. as well, in south of the border, also impacted by it. So, yeah, I think there's a whole bunch of discussion about climate change contributing to this, but I think there's all kinds of other factors that are also being discussed when it comes to what's causing these fires.
Yeah. But forest management being one of them that comes up.
Exactly. Well, we've been preventing forest fires for 100 years, and at some point it catches up. So that's one of the factors.
Yeah. Yesterday on the show, when we were talking about some of the smoke, and we were talking about some of the potential impacts on, say, the Ontario corn crop because of the smoke, right? And we were chatting about how like the impact of the smoke is like one of those things where we're not going to really know if there's impact until we get to the end of the season, right? Because there's not a lot of research that's done or data to show. Like we've seen some of the experiences with some of the August forest fire smoke in Western Canada and how it can really delay that canola from reaching that final maturity. But we're kind of early in the season right now for this Ontario corn crop, so we don't really know. And that kind of, I guess, Lyndsey, a bit of a point of uncomfortableness when we lack that data.
Well, for sure. And I mean, we do know that, if we have significantly more overcast skies for extended periods of time, same thing. It all interrupts, of course, that solar radiation coming down and growing those crops. So, will it have a greater impact on soybeans? What will the, overall impact be on corn? We don't know. It is early. The other thing is, how long does it stick around? So, we do have rain coming through the region today and through the weekend and most of next week for a lot of us. And that really does help, of course, clear the skies a little bit. But that also happens to be the changing weather patterns that, we've had when a rain front has come through, it sort of cleared it out, but the air it brings in after it has actually been worse. So, it will depend on just how long this goes on for, but it is a big unknown. This is pretty early in the season to be worried about this. But I know Peter Johnson we've talked a lot about, even just lack of sunshine because of cloudy conditions really slows down development. So that's always a concern, especially with the corn crop when we're trying to get the corn, dry or to maturity and dry down in the fall. Will it mean, firing up those grain dryers a little early this year? Maybe.
Kelvin, this week we saw StatsCan release I guess their June report on acreage across all the crops in Canada. Anything stick? I didn't find there was any surprises. Did anything stick out to you?
Not really any big surprises. It certainly showed that there's been a shift to what you might call the mainstream or big acre crops, more canola, more wheat, even more than what the pre-report expectations were. So there was maybe a bit of a surprise or pressure on markets there in terms of more supply potentially. Of course, weather is what everybody's paying attention to right now. Also more corn and soybean acreage. Even though soybeans dropped in Ontario, here in Manitoba, we've made up the difference with a more than 40% increase in soybean acres after record yields last year. It's looking less likely that, or not very likely that we'll reach those yields again this year with dry conditions. But yeah, it's I'd agree with you. Not a whole lot of surprises, but kind of showing this trend away from more diverse crop rotations back to a canola wheat rotation in Western Canada and soybeans certainly in Eastern Canada as well.
Yeah, flax down dramatically, expected. Oats down dramatically, expected.
Oats are record low oat acreage in Western.
Which oats are sort of that boom and bust, right? So not entirely surprising. I think perhaps some of the most interesting parts of this report are all on the pulse side. And our friends over at Left Field Commodity Research, they outlined a lot of that, but that impacts. So, I mean, it's super important to Saskatchewan and to the pulse growers, but a lot of the shifting, happened in those acres. But realistically, in the grand scheme of things, that's super important to pulse growers, but overall, not really any big surprises. So some neat stuff on the pulse side, but that's maybe the most interesting part.
Now, I didn't see what Left Field said. Was that market driven or disease driven? Did they think?
That's a great question. So a lot of moves on so if anybody, Chuck Penner, of course, is a good friend of the show. He should be on next week, Shaun. You should give him a call. Reporting red lentils.
Okay, producer Lyndsey, sure.
28%, and greens up 21. So a huge shift in the red to green ratio on the lentil side. I think Chuck says he was surprised to see pea acres down more than yellows. So, and that goes against the price signal, he said. So that is interesting. I'm going to potentially guess we've got a disease question perhaps in there. We know that Saskatchewan is having much better moisture conditions than a lot of the prairies, but of course that moisture is going to drive potentially root rot, specifically Aphanomyces, which is a huge hit to pea and lentils. So if you went into the spring with really good moisture conditions, you might have swapped out some of those acres if Aphanomyces has been a big risk. So yeah, anyway.
One other point from the StatsCan report that doesn't often get a lot of attention, but StatsCan actually tracks tame hay acres across the country as well.
Oh boy! Please enlighten us. What tame hay?
And it's included in the charts that we see and that are distributed. But tame hay acreage down, continuing a trend down at 12.9 million acres, down from 13.3 million last year. So. That kind of is another indicator of what's happening in the cattle sector in terms of long-term trends.
Yeah. Well, this week I was on a big road trip. I saw a lot of acres this week from behind the windshield of my Jeep.
How many miles or kilometers did you cover?
Yes, did you cover in a week?
No, not even a week. In 2.5 days, I did 1,835 kilometers. 19 hours of driving.
A lot.
Yeah. Drove Lethbridge to Weyburn across the border, and then down through into central Montana. So it was. I saw a lot of acres.
Where were the nicest ones? Where were the nicest crops? That's what we all want to know.
Well, so I think personally, maybe just because I was more alert, I had about my fifth monster the drive by that point. But I think the best crop is on Highway 87 south of Havre, between Havre and Great Falls through that Fort Benton area. Beautiful crops. Which has been pretty dry area, to be honest with you, the past number of years. So that's probably a very much needed yield there. But at least going 80 miles an hour down the road, the crops look pretty good. Now, to that point, though, what I've heard a lot in the last 2 weeks is that there are a lot of crops across Western Canada, different regions. You look from the road, you're driving by, you're like, it looks pretty good. You get into the crop, and it's a little bit more disappointing as you get close up, which I've heard that continuously, which is I guess makes sense in some regard. You should get out of your truck and go walk your fields if you are crop scouting.
I don't know about other areas, but here in southern Manitoba, all of our rain this summer has come from like single cloud outbursts. So you have parts of a quarter section that look much better than other parts because they didn't get the same rainfall. We haven't had the general widespread rains like we often have at this time of year. And
timing of rain. So you're correct, Kelvin. I've heard that from a lot of growers as well. And the timing has we were looking at some lentil fields in northeastern Montana with a couple researchers and agronomist, and Aphanomyces was terrible in the field. And the researcher from NDSU talked about the timing of that rain and that quick warm up of the soil. Just really, really bad. I learned a lot about Aphanomyces this week. I did.
Look at you go, getting your agronomy on.
Well, dramatic though. Like I remember it sticks with me. Like it was just this morning, being at that Saskatchewan Pulse Grower meeting back in January at Crop Production Show. And the chair of SPG saying, if we don't sort this out, if we don't fix this through whatever means, genetics, practices, just whatever, if we don't fix it, the pulse acres we won't even need to get together in 10 years because we won't need to because there won't be any pulse crop. That was a dramatic statement. And so it's something that needs to be figured out and dealt with, and we got to sort it out.
This also, I think, speaks to the importance of getting a bird's eye view walking your crop. Yes, absolutely. But especially if you're an agronomist with a lot of acres to cover, it's a great way to figure out where you should go scout, to get the bird's eye view. It's amazing to me, the technology we have that you can literally, whether it's drone or satellite or whatever imaging you're going to use, and be able to make your plan of okay, why does this look like this? And so, Kelvin, if you could, I would love to see some aerial shots of your fields, please. Well, get on that.
To that point though, that field that we're in, and big shout out to Blake Rasmussen, who you hosted us for the morning. The first thing he said is, you got to get the drone up. You got to take a look at this from the air, because it's actually worse than us standing in some bare patches. And boy, was he right. The drone, and it's we're producing a video, and we're gonna that drone footage is going to be in the video, and it's pretty staggering. Mm-hmm. Hey, let's take a break. We've got more coming up here on the RealAg Issues Panel. Shaun Haney, Lyndsey Smith, Kelvin Heppner, and you're listening to RealAg Radio.
Advanced canola trait technology is here. And it's soon to be the talk of the town. Optimum Glide delivers excellent yield potential and agronomic trait performance. Improved crop safety. Enhanced weed control. And a wider window of application. You're going to want to see this. Learn more at OptimumGlide.ca.
As you head out into the field this season, the Corn School's got you covered. Everything from tillage discussions, weed control info, field trial results, yield strategies, and more. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF. Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from RealAgriculture.com, or as a podcast from your favorite streaming service. Download the latest episode today.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by Pride Seeds, BASF, and Syngenta Canada.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio. Join Chatsworth Farm in the county of Vermilion River on Saturday, August 19th, for their 4th annual Alberta Open Farm Days, I should say. Meet the family behind the farm, take in the artisan market, live music, a barbecue, farm tours, and engage with the local farming community as we celebrate agriculture in the province. Learn more by visiting chatsworthfarm.ca. Lyndsey, that sounds like something right up your alley.
I think it's too far, but it does sound great.
It's too far.
I'll see what I can do. How's that sound?
It'd be fun. I think it'd be a good time.
Yeah, I agree.
Last night I had supper. We're in Helena for a baseball tournament. I had supper. I really love old buildings and towns that, that was the old courthouse. Then it was a barber shop, and then it was a brothel, and then it became a church. Those kind of stories. And last night, You're probably wondering where am I going with this. We had supper in Helena, Montana at the Montana Club, and a very historic building in Helena. 1885, the restaurant opened. 1885. It was super cool. Started as a gentleman's club, men only. 1915, they got a little bit more progressive, and they allowed women to come and eat as well. But very, very cool. Like old. I find that, like, at least in where I am in Lethbridge, Alberta, we tend to knock those buildings down. Like, Kelvin, is that an issue? Do you find in Manitoba or?
Yeah. Well, the finance part of it, we don't seem to put as high a priority on it as other parts of the world, maybe. I'm not they don't get taken care of, and then they become a hazard, and down they go.
Yeah. Yeah. We were just waiting for John Dutton to walk in. It was that kind of place. It was pretty cool. It was pretty good. Okay. Kelvin, you got some economic news. What's going on with that Canadian GDP?
Yeah, the StatsCan GDP estimate for April was released earlier today, and it was flat in the month of April, even though StatsCan had been expecting a slight increase of 0.2%. It came in at zero, and even zero, no change, and largely due to the federal workers' strike. So outside of that, it looks like the Canadian economy maybe grew by like 0.1% in April. So basically a rounding error, and the strike by PSAC workers, Public Service Alliance of Canada workers, back this spring dragged it down to where StatsCan says there was no change. And of course, this is contrary to the U.S., where the U.S. GDP number came in this week above expectations at 2% growth versus expectations of, I think it was 1.4% or something like that. So kind of a different story north and south of the border.
And it sounds like growing sentiment in Canada and the U.S. is that we've got more interest rate hikes coming.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the U.S. numbers certainly will give the Fed and Jerome Powell some more room to work with in terms of increasing rates if the economy is still growing. So, but this number won't be as favorable for the Bank of Canada, but odds are still tilted toward another 25 basis point hike from Bank of Canada coming up here in July.
Boy, I tell you what, Lyndsey, when people go to renew their mortgages, they are going to be like, my payment is what?
Yeah. I mean, and we have been talking about this for a while, right? But this is part of how this all works. If you had if you still had 2 years left on your mortgage or whatever the case may be, the longer this continues, and I hate to say that Kelvin was right. It's supposed to be, the interest rates go up.
You
and
hate to say it was right?
The pain. Well, when it's inflation related, yes.
Okay.
But the longer this goes on, as far as trying to get inflation in check, and the more it's going to hurt. And the more it's going to hurt more individuals, and potentially the sort of long tail of the hurt of this. And it's true, the longer this goes on, the more likely someone has to renew. And never mind mortgages. I mean, yes, it's going to be a huge, huge change to people's income. But like, if you've had to try and like get into a new vehicle or, any of these things, like the interest rates are just, it stings, y'all. It stings. Yeah. So, this idea of what you could afford or what you couldn't or what you could do with the money left over, there's not going to be a lot of money left over.
Yeah.
So,
so far, though, consumer spending hasn't changed a lot, and that's why the central banks keep.
I don't entirely understand that. Although I guess we have to see, or are we riding the tails of, apparently consumers had so much money socked away because they didn't do anything for 2 years during COVID. Are we just working our way through that? What happens when that runs out?
Or credit cards haven't been maxed out yet?
I don't know. So it's worrisome.
Anytime I hear like Visa or Amex talk about, some of their financial reporting on like Fox Business or CNBC, and they talk about how, the forecast of, good Q2, Q3, Q4, or what EBITDA is going to be going forward. It's sort of like, that I don't like to hear they're going to have good quarters, because that probably means that.
You know what that means. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a bit scary.
We got the Competition Bureau's report on Canada's grocery industry, Canada's retail grocery industry report. And, one of the things that stuck out to me there is they talked about lack of competition and maybe potentially new entrants needed to come into Canada to provide greater selection And I had said earlier this week that, I think there's a lot less selection in a Canadian grocery store versus, say, what you would see even in a small town grocery store in the U.S., I find. Lyndsey, is a bit of a pipe dream to expect that Canada's going to have other grocers entering the market. What are your thoughts?
Yes. And perhaps it's a little too harsh, but realistically, and, before we started this show today, we were talking, a little bit about just our population, right? In that, on the grand scheme of things, Canada, yes, we hit 40 million people, but we're 40 million people. That is an economy of a certain size. There's only so many people. There's only so many shoppers. There's only, so many household budgets to fill. And realistically, this is also a space that right now, I don't know, our political system right now hasn't been terribly friendly to the grocery sector, if you think about it, as far as those who own grocery stores. So, is it realistic to think we'd have, new players join? Highly unlikely. Will we have, greater choice? I guess there is potentially some things in the works, like the grocery code of conduct, like some of the analytics we've talked about, that could potentially open up the door for more products or more people to bring products to market, and make that perhaps a bit more straightforward. But we have, people like to complain about, dare I say, let's bring in the supply managed discussion, right? Of, limited choices on, cheeses and specialty dairy and those sorts of things because of our supply management system. So I don't know. It's ultimately, we're not that huge of a market. Retail is super expensive to try and break into. And whether it's a new grocery chain or just new products, I feel like it's an incredibly difficult space to break into. And maybe the economics just aren't there for it.
Yeah, the skew that I really notice when I compare and contrast Canada and the U.S. going to the grocery store is gluten-free. My daughter is celiac, so we need to buy gluten-free products. And you look at breakfast cereal as an example. It's amazing the selection in the U.S. for gluten-free. Not the case in Canada. It's been our experience. Maybe it's just the grocery stores we're going to. I don't know, but that's definitely been our experience. Kelvin, what did you take out of this report?
I thought it was interesting. I'm curious how the government responds. Like, are they going to change We've talked about the grocery code of conduct, but could they make other policy changes to foster not only in new entrants in terms of international companies? We've seen, of course, Costco and Walmart would be the two big players in Canada that have head offices elsewhere outside the country. The other three main grocery companies are all based in Canada. But do we see a Tesco or some other brand from overseas or south of the border enter the country? That I'm not sure the government can do much about that. Yeah. And those companies, we've seen Target and others try coming into Canada, and it hasn't been super successful. But do we see the environment change to foster independent and small grocers? I could see that potentially playing up with political demographic that supports the current government. I'm not sure how successful or sustainable that type of policy would be. And I would also note, going back to the population discussion, I saw an interesting article this week. In the past, we always use a 10x figure for US versus Canada, US being 10 times greater than Canada. Canada's population is actually growing much faster than the US. It's actually closer to only 8 times bigger at this point. So heads up, American companies looking to do business in Canada, we're growing faster than the US.
We're now only 8 times smaller.
But and I know there's details to be worked out, but if I'm a grocer looking at the Canadian market and I hear there's this new Canadian code of conduct for grocers going to be implemented,
it's not going to be good for grocers, probably.
Yeah. That's that's deterring competition, I would think. I don't know. And a lot of this has to do with local politics, municipal stuff, and provincial politics. How do you create? The report talked about creating an environment to foster and facilitate new competitors and growth of independent businesses, and I'm not sure how you do that from a federal government perspective. Well, a bit of a show update here. We're on point 2 of 14. We need to take a break, and we need to speed up this conversation. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
Whether you're seeding, harvesting, or anything in between, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has you covered. Timely agronomic information from industry experts available online anytime. Give your wheat crop a good start and a great finish with the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by C&M Seeds, Syngenta Canada, and the Alberta Wheat and Barley Commission.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio for the RealAg Issues Panel. Shaun Haney, Lyndsey Smith, Kelvin Heppner, all of Real Agriculture. And we should say Happy Canada Day to everybody this weekend as well, whatever you're doing. And be safe with those fireworks. Lyndsey, you setting fireworks off this weekend?
I'm not a big fireworks fan.
How not?
Well, in my own backyard, and I'll explain why. We have livestock and also livestock guardian dogs, and setting off fireworks doesn't exactly keep them calm and chill.
Okay, that's fair.
So I love going to watch them. The New Year's Eve fireworks downtown Ottawa, beautiful, highly recommend it. This year, though, it is a question as to whether or not any municipalities around here will allow them. So we are, of course, we've had lots of rain, and we were under a burn ban, not so much anymore. And but there is a concern with all the wildfires and all the smoke around. Should we allow fireworks? So we'll see this weekend where they will be allowed and not allowed.
I know Kelvin has probably been stocking up with fireworks for weeks for his own private display show. Right? Is that the truth, Kelvin?
You know me well. Yeah, not a huge stockpile. We have some friends bringing some over too, but we're planning to set some off here after the sun sets on tomorrow, Saturday.
You got to be careful with those instructions. We were in Whitefish one time for July 4th. And we're all going over to a buddy's place there. And the instructions were, hey, bring some fireworks. Well, everybody did. Everybody stopped at the local Hong Kong Harry fireworks shop. And we had enough fireworks where you would wonder what exactly was going on in that house. And it was epic.
You're supposed to set them off outside.
Well, outside. You know what I mean. Yeah. We had a lot of fireworks to let off. And it wasn't... be safe, everybody. I got stories to tell. Okay, let's keep rolling here with the RealAg Issues Panel. Hey, next week... we've got a USMCA confab happening. We're going to see the trade ministers or trade representatives from Canada, the U.S., and Mexico get together. I guess, Kelvin, I'm sure they're going to be talking about GM corn to do with Mexico and, of course, Canada's refusal to make changes to its allocation of dairy TRQs. It seems like this record just keeps on getting played.
Yeah, and I expect it will continue. And what are we at now? Just over the halfway point towards the first sunset clause in the USMCA or CUSMA agreement. So this will, of course, all lead up to that renegotiation process or the renewal process. So dairy, corn expect to be the two big issues in terms of agricultural discussions.
Yeah, do you think we'll have any of the country of origin discussions?
Oh, that's a good
in
point.
This one too.
Yeah, I would add that one to the list too. Yeah,
brought up.
I think so.
Yeah,
I think Canada has stated where it stands on it right now, and it's kind of waiting for the U.S. process to move ahead because right now it's just a proposed rule, right? So
yeah, that's right.
Wait to see what the final rule looks like before. Or right now it's kind of just waiting and see what U.S. lawmakers come put together for the final rule.
Yeah, these things. I've said this before, but one of the big things in this USMCA agreement was that they were going to find resolution of trade disputes quicker. That has not been the case. It seems just as slow as ever. And
the they go through the process quite quickly, but it doesn't necessarily end up with both sides feeling like a resolution was reached.
Yeah.
Canada did make changes to its dairy policy, just not to the extent the U.S. wanted them to.
Right. I just, and you look at it and both sides continue to say that they're right. So clearly we're at a standstill. It's like a bad divorce or something. It's not to say that we're splitting ties, but we've both have our entrenched positions.
Yes. And we knew it would be a difficult one. And I'll be honest, I'm a little, like, to Kelvin's point, exactly. Canada said it made its changes, but the changes didn't really reflect what the U.S. had complained about. So did they really change it? It's a little disingenuous.
Well, New Zealand also believes Canada really hasn't changed either, right? Like, it's not just the U.S.
But there are areas where we have stopped exporting some things that agreed to terms in the USMCA negotiations. And I think one thing around USMCA and CUSMA discussions is we're starting to really have trade data now in terms of how imports and exports have been affected now that the agreement is a couple of years old. So there's starting to be a little bit more informed discussion there. I know on the chicken numbers, we were looking at them last week. I was looking at them with somebody else, and it was highlighted that we're actually importing more chicken. And the point was made that maybe it's surprising there hasn't been more discussion highlighting the impact that CUSMA has had on the chicken supply coming into the country.
But do we need that chicken? Or, like, were we short? And it was like, hey, we could just get it from our friends? Like, I always wonder, like, or was it a price thing? Was it?
It's probably a price thing.
Yeah.
It's probably a price thing, but I don't know if it was that much. Of course, we know what egg prices did in the U.S. during coming out of COVID, and they've come down now. But no, supplies were pretty tight, I think, everywhere. So
yeah.
We've seen a number of labor impasses coming out of the pandemic. You're basically the tail end of the pandemic, and continue to do so. We've got now a port workers strike on the West Coast set for, I believe it's Saturday. One of the big disputes, and this is an issue that's coming up a lot. You look at the Screenwriters Guild strike that happened this past spring. It came up there too. It's the impact of automation and artificial intelligence and the impact it potentially has on jobs. So in this West Coast port worker strike, they're talking about devastating impacts of port automation. Now, Kelvin, the export market, we're using a port because we're exporting or importing. It's a competitive marketplace. Shouldn't we want there to be automation in the sense that it makes us probably, it's, I guess, more cost efficient? Or am I looking at this wrong?
Well, I think it depends who we is in your statement. If you're the union representing workers at the port and means fewer jobs, no, but the rest of the economy, yes, I do think we want more efficiency, especially because the West Coast ports in Canada, Port of Vancouver has been ranked again this year in near the bottom of the world rankings.
Yes, I think it's the bottom.
The bottom, second last, maybe. I thought it was second last this year out of like 300 or 400 ports around the world. So that's certainly not somewhere where Canada wants to be as a major exporting country. And as we import more trade happens with Asian markets, all those types of things. It's not where we want to be. So more efficiency, whatever it takes on the West Coast, I think, is what the rest of the economy wants. One thing to note here, though, a silver lining for those of us in agriculture is grain will not be affected by a strike if it happens tomorrow or if it starts tomorrow, as the Canada Labor Code specifically says that port workers must continue to move grain. So that's bulk grain. I'm not sure about containers. Stuff moving in containers might still be affected.
So, Lyndsey, let's apply this to the past and history and something that's already happened. To me, this is a little bit like, you know what? The blacksmiths union has to strike, and they want to fight the fact that there's going to be tires on vehicles, and we're not going to need blacksmiths anymore because we're moving away from horses.
Right. So, I mean, or even a more recent example would be even in the automotive industry, right? I mean, automation did displace workers. At the same time, there's a certain level of just remaining competitive. And as we know, and as we've noted, like, our ports are not the most efficient. There is a huge leap that likely needs to happen here. I don't know all the details, necessarily, but I'm going to assume that why the union is not so pleased is that, increased AI or increased automation is likely going to displace some of their workforce. But ultimately, I mean, we are in a society where there are plenty of jobs. We're not, super hurting, but people also, they probably like their job. They probably like where they live. They like what they do, and change is hard. So I'm not saying it's easy for those workers, but ultimately an industry has to evolve, and we have the tools to potentially significantly increase efficiency. And let's face it, there's a certain portion of our workforce that, automating it becomes a risk management tool. You don't have to find people to do certain jobs that maybe it's hard to find people for. So, yes.
Maybe machines will load grain in the rain.
Well, exactly, right? Like, there are certain things that, and especially when we talk about logistics, that is incredibly complicated. There's so many things to, consider, keep track of. Where's everything going? We need levels of, this is where technology really shines. And ultimately, I feel for the potential of people who might lose jobs, but I also recognize that there are a lot of other jobs out there, and certain industries just have to adapt. And realistically, all of us do.
The net benefit to society and the Canadian economy as a whole is
positive. Yeah, for sure.
So is it a trap then to be like, where we're like, we can't replace, we shouldn't be taking away these jobs? Like, that just seems like a kind of a slippery slope on how we choose what jobs are worth saving and which ones aren't. Like,
but is it really about, like, to me, it's not necessarily about saving a job per se. Certain jobs become obsolete. Just like, I mean, your example of a blacksmith is a good one, in that as an industry moves forward, as a workforce, we have to evolve too. And so, and like, we don't always get it right? Like, we've talked about, and especially right now, we're talking about a huge gap in the trades, in having enough tradespeople to potentially build houses for all the Canadians that need it. Like, we don't always get this right per se, but realistically, the market should evolve how it's going to, and our workforce should evolve along with it. So certain jobs are just not necessarily going to be either as in high demand or maybe even necessary 10 years from now or 20 years from now.
Well, and think about, there's been lots of talk. We saw this in the U.S. with coal miners, like transition programs. We saw this. We've heard this with Alberta energy workers. There's a lot of pushback.
Yep.
Right. To that potential transition, but we are in need of plumbers and carpenters. There's truck drivers,
and the net benefit to society does warrant having programs, some sort of safety net for workers that lose their jobs in these types of situations, because society benefits in a greater way, and can take some of that piece of that pie and give it back to the workers who are out of a job, and help them retrain and help them out in other ways. So to me, it's a no-brainer that we should be looking at anything that increases port efficiency, and whether they go on strike this week or not could potentially accelerate it if they aren't careful, I'd say.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's take a break. We got more coming up here on the RealAg Issues Panel right after this.
Peter Johnson at WheatPete, RealAgriculture.com. I'm the host of The Word, and I love doing The Word. I love the questions. I love the challenges. I love having to apply agronomics to all over the globe and areas outside of my normal jurisdiction. Also, I love the feedback the most, where growers challenge me, tell me about their plot results, help me to learn. The Word, absolutely the best part of my day.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
And Welcome back to RealAg Radio, RealAg Issues Panel. Shaun Haney, Lyndsey Smith, Kelvin Heppner, all of Real Agriculture, bringing you the big topics of the week. Trying to get to as many as we possibly can. Kelvin, add to the list. Another province is saying they have concerns about the clean fuel regulation.
Yep. Speaking of Canada Day, July 1st, tomorrow is the start of the federal clean fuel regulations, and Alberta joined Saskatchewan and the Maritime provinces this week in calling for a pause or a delay in implementation. So seeing pressure from the provinces on the federal government. And of course, this, from an agricultural perspective, we've highlighted this in the past. This is the same policy that is driving a lot of the investment, or this type of policy, both in Canada and more so in the U.S., is driving the investment in canola crushing capacity, soybean crushing capacity in the U.S. And so there's kind of a conflicted position, I'd say, by a lot of people who want to see the increased crush capacity, and this includes provincial politicians in Saskatchewan and Alberta that are opposing the clean fuel regulation, but at the same time, they also want to see that value-added processing capacity from new crush plants being built in Western Canada as well.
So being against the CFR is not being against biofuels, right? There is, maybe it's a different biofuel policy.
Yeah, we'd have to have the CFR, how many days has it taken? I forget the number of years it's taken to get to this point.
Oh, it's like 2,500 days or some crazy thing I was told. It's like nuts.
Years. So, I'm not sure that we'd have a different biofuel policy that quickly. So I don't know. To me, there are things about the clean fuel regulations that certainly politicians and Canadians can take issue with, including the likely increased costs it's going to reflect in fuel prices, not tomorrow, but down the road. That is one thing where I think there's actually some misinformation happening around this. It's the Conservative Party MPs across the country are talking about a 17-cent increase that we're going to see tomorrow because of this new carbon tax that's taking effect. They're calling it the second carbon tax, and they're referencing the Parliamentary Budgetary Officer report that's where the 17-cent per liter increase comes from. That report actually said it's going to be 17-cent impact by 2030, not July 1st, 2023. Oh. So that's where, and it's actually a soft start in terms of what fuel companies are going to be required to. It's phased in over years. So by 2030, the PBO estimated a 17-cent impact. Not tomorrow. So just to clarify and bring some more nuance, of course, to this discussion.
Now, we've also go ahead, Lyndsey.
I was just going to say, nobody wants nuance, Kelvin. We want hard, right? Yeah, but it is important to speak in facts. We need to ground this in what's actually happening, not what could happen. So it is important. Yeah.
We also saw this week continued opposition to the CFIA transport regs. Now, this has to do with, I believe, trade shows and fairs is where some of this conversation is rooted. We've heard from Shadow Minister of Agriculture John Barlow sent out a statement on it. Senator Black has made comments on it. Lyndsey, what's going on here?
So, I mean, it is certainly a concern as far as an added level of reporting that is going to be required of livestock owners. So we are in, I don't know, let's call it a decade of updating both our transport and our traceability regulations for our livestock. This is across the board. This is cattle all the way to, sheep, pigs, and actually bringing goats under our traceability regulations. So the next phase and phase in is going to require reporting, not just recording, which is how a lot of the rules were before, of CFIA approved indicators. So those are often tags, not exclusively, but usually. So basically fairs, so your local fair, your summer fairs, often 4-H shows included, are going to have to do reporting of livestock move in and move out. I think it's actually just move-ins, but it is another layer of traceability as to where animals have been. It is essentially rooted in, of course, animal health. If we have an outbreak of particular diseases, we need to know which animals were in contact with which, where they went, etc. We have, of course, seen pushback from the fair boards who basically are saying we're already, often a volunteer team. We're trying to run these shows that, have been under significant pressure, especially through COVID, but even before then. And the fair boards are basically saying, this is onerous and we don't want to do it. I understand where Senator Black and John Barlow are coming from, in that they've come out to say, this isn't a good rule, or they're pushing back on it and we shouldn't be, punishing our fair boards. At the same time, as a livestock producer, I've sat in on the webinars. I've trying to wrap my head around what we're going to have to do. It is a lot more reporting on animal movement, but at the same time, animals are already required to have their CFIA indicators to even attend fairs. You have to put in, when you are going to enter a show, that information is entered. Honestly, there already is a lot of this recording happening. I think, if the government is going to ask for this, then offer some support on how to make the reporting happen more easily. So perhaps some support for our fair boards to do it. But ultimately, saying that fairs would be exempt from the traceability is actually completely against what traceability is about. It's a huge commingling of animals from a whole bunch of different farms. We need the traceability of who went there and who went home. Or perhaps who went there and then went to slaughter. That needs to get accounted for as well. And that happens through a reporting system. Canada has, for many of its livestock species, an identification system. We don't have full traceability. And these regulations are bringing us towards traceability. And we have to have that, including at fairs.
Why would we have to do reporting prior to there being an actual incident?
Because if you don't report and there is an incident, then you have to go and try and find that information, which could be held all over the place. And depending on what the disease is, that adds potentially months upon months upon months of work to try and find where these animals even travel to in their lives.
So, but aren't we making then an assumption the government's going to be organized and they're going to be able to do that in some sort of timely manner? Because that seems sort of like against how governments function.
Perhaps, but CFIA already does it. And actually, we've seen it in action through BSE. Our cattle and dairy, especially, both have incredible traceability systems, and they worked. We were able to find cohorts of these animals that were potentially, herd mates of some of these animals. So we've had instances years ago of scrapie findings or suspected scrapie, which is sort of like BSE for sheep. And we need to be able to trace animals. And yes, CFIA does do it. If there is a requirement to do it, they will look into it. And that is actually a big part of what they have to do.
So, Kelvin, what do you think?
I don't have a lot of firsthand experience with this, but to me, the government should. To me, it makes sense to have traceability, including as a poultry producer, avian influenza would be the outbreak of the last year would be another example where CFIA traceability happens, or all the stakeholders working together on traceability makes it happen. To me, the government, like Lyndsey said, should be making it as easy as possible. There should just be an app that the organizer of the show opens the app and inputs the information that they need to, and boom, it's done. It doesn't need to be that complicated.
Well, all we need is $50 million to build another app like they built for during COVID.
Well, we already have it. Maybe we can just convert it into a livestock app. Exactly.
Yeah.
That'd be another $50 million, though.
Just got to change the name of ArriveCan to something animal related.
Exactly.
There you go.
Yep. We just solved it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Stamp. Done.
There's also Farm Health Guardian, and there are, shout out to a friend of the Rob Hannum and his company. There are private solutions to these types of issues, and I think it could be done in a way that isn't onerous and doesn't force fairs and 4-H shows to be canceled.
Well, sadly, we are out of time because I feel like I have more thoughts to get out of my head, but it'll have to wait till next week. Hey, Lyndsey, have yourself a great Canada Day long weekend.
You as well.
You too, Kelvin. Be careful with those fireworks.
Thank you. Will do. Happy Canada Day.
Clearly, sheep are more scared of fireworks than chicken. So that's what we found out here today. If you have any feedback on today's show, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or you can call that RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Everybody have themselves a great Canada Day long weekend. We'll be back with you next week. Thanks so much for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio.